Asterisk, she said he didn't matter, but every look, every touch, told a different story. Asterisk, it's concise, emotionally charged, and instantly creates curiosity for a slow-burn romance. If you want, I can also draft 5 alternative hooks you could test for maximum engagement on YouTube. Do you want me to do that? The story opens in a quiet, everyday setting, a cafe, a bookstore, or a park, somewhere that feels ordinary, yet intimate. The male narrator, young, observant, and naturally reflective, notices her. Her presence is unmissable, even if she doesn't try to stand out. She moves with a calm, measured grace, the kind that comes from life experience, a subtle elegance that doesn't scream for attention but quietly commands it. He's drawn to the way her eyes seem to register everything, noting details most people miss, the slight crease at the corner of a smile, the way her fingers hover over a book before settling on it, the gentle tilt of her head when she listens. He observes her behavior toward someone she repeatedly insists isn't important. Perhaps it's a colleague, an old friend, or even a casual acquaintance, someone she claims is inconsequential in her life. Yet, in the brief, fleeting moments, her actions betray a different story. Her voice softens when she speaks to him, a subtle warmth in the timbre that disappears the moment others approach. Her hand lingers ever so slightly on the table near his, a touch that seems accidental but carries quiet intent. Even a glance can speak volumes, a pause, a quick dart of her eyes in his direction, a flicker of a smile that she immediately masks. The narrator notices all of it, heart quietly racing, mind quietly wondering. The emotional goal here is subtle tension and intrigue. The audience should feel the narrator's fascination, his curiosity, and the faint unease that comes with noticing contradictions in someone's behavior. She says one thing, words of dismissal, casual indifference, but her actions suggest care, attention, maybe even longing. This inconsistency forms the core of part 1, the slow burn of discovery, the first crack in the surface of her composed exterior. Sensory details keep the audience immersed. Perhaps the sun filters through the window, casting light on the curve of her cheek as she turns toward the person she says doesn't matter. The smell of coffee or old paper lingers, grounding the scene in reality. Every movement, her hand brushing her hair behind her ear, a subtle shift in posture, a barely audible laugh, is observed keenly by the narrator. He notices, and so do we. The narrator's internal reflection is key. She said he wasn't important. But when he spoke, it was as if the world narrowed around her, and her laughter, her eyes, her very presence, none of it belonged to anyone else. This shows the audience the emotional tension without dialogue, establishing the foundation for the slow burn romance. By the end of this keynote, the audience should feel a mix of intrigue and warmth, a sense that something quietly extraordinary is unfolding beneath ordinary interactions. This is the spark, the subtle contrast between words and actions, the first heartbeat of emotional intimacy that will grow in the next parts. The stage is set for a story that promises careful observation, tender gestures, and the compelling tension of feelings left unspoken. After the initial spark of curiosity in part 1, the story slows to a more intimate, reflective pace. The male narrator begins to notice the subtle patterns in her behavior, those tiny gestures and fleeting expressions that betray the truth behind her words. While she insists that someone is not important, her attention and care suggest otherwise, and he cannot help but observe. These moments are quiet and almost imperceptible. Perhaps she adjusts a stray strand of his hair while handing him a notebook, or lightly touches his shoulder as she passes by. These touches are fleeting, almost accidental, but they leave an impression, a warmth that lingers longer than the physical contact. The narrator's heart beats a little faster at these small signals, though he convinces himself that he is simply noticing human kindness. Yet deep down, he knows there's something more layered at play, a complexity in her attentions that hints at emotions unspoken. The emotional goal here is to deepen the subtle tension. The audience should feel both the narrator's growing awareness and the quiet intimacy forming between them. Each small action becomes a building block for emotional connection. The scene is not about grand gestures, but the gentle, unspoken language of care. Sensory detail is critical in this part. The brush of her fingertips as she hands him a cup of coffee carries a faint warmth. The soft brush of her coat against his arm as she moves past sends a shiver of recognition down his spine. Even her voice becomes an instrument of intimacy, slightly softer when she addresses him, her laughter catching just for a moment as he makes a passing comment. These details are small, yet they accumulate, creating an emotional resonance that the audience can feel. Narrative progression here also emphasizes internal reflection. The narrator is acutely aware of these small moments, analyzing each gesture, each look, each pause. He notices the subtle contrasts, how she speaks lightly of someone, yet her hands or eyes betray a quiet preoccupation. He begins to sense that her world is more complicated than it appears, that the walls she maintains around herself are delicate and perhaps meant to protect something precious. This keynote also allows for slow character development. The narrator's own feelings start to emerge, not yet desire in the overt sense, but a quiet fascination, an appreciation of her depth and nuance. His observations are thoughtful, sometimes questioning, sometimes quietly admiring. For example, he might notice her pausing in the hallway, eyes softening at a memory, or a gentle sigh when she thinks no one is looking. These moments build the emotional bridge that will carry the story forward. By the end of this keynote, the audience should feel a growing sense of closeness between the narrator and the older woman. The tension is quiet but undeniable, rooted in small gestures, soft touches, and fleeting moments of vulnerability. The foundation for the slow burn romance is solid. The audience sees that emotions are forming gradually, that care and attention are speaking louder than words, and that the story is moving toward deeper emotional intimacy. By this point, the male narrator has begun to piece together the subtle contradictions in her behavior. She insists, both to others and sometimes even to him, that someone in her life is not important, yet her actions tell a different story. This keynote centers on internal conflict, both for the narrator and the woman, and begins to layer the slow burn tension that defines the story. The narrator's observations grow sharper. Every small touch, every glance now carries weight. A hand lingering near an object he's reaching for, a shoulder brushing his as she steps past, a fleeting smile that disappears as soon as it's noticed. Each moment triggers a cascade of thoughts and feelings in him. He begins to question the meaning behind her words. Why would she act with such care if he truly didn't matter? This internal questioning is essential. It engages the audience in his emotional processing, making them complicit in the tension. Sensory detail heightens the immersion. Perhaps the faint warmth of her hand lingers on his arm longer than necessary, or her scent, a subtle blend of perfume and something comforting, like freshly brewed tea, lingers in the air after she leaves the room. The narrator notices the quiet steadiness of her presence in contrast with the fleeting, almost hesitant gestures she gives to others. Every subtle movement becomes a signal, and he can't help but decode them, even as his own emotions begin to stir. This part also introduces emotional hesitation. The narrator is conscious of his own feelings, though he doesn't yet fully admit them. He feels a quiet pull toward her, an awareness of her depth, her grace, and her vulnerability. Yet he hesitates, unsure of the social boundaries, the age difference, and the propriety of his attention. This hesitation adds realism and relatability. Viewers recognize the tension between desire, curiosity, and restraint. The older woman's behavior is layered too. She may be unaware of how transparent her gestures are, or she may deliberately mask her attentions while giving in to moments of unconscious care. For instance, her voice may soften, her eyes linger, or she may unconsciously mirror his posture, subtle, human signs that she's emotionally present. She might laugh quietly at a joke he makes, then immediately return to composed neutrality, creating contradictory signals that pull the narrator deeper into observation and quiet fascination. Internal monologue is crucial here. He reflects on these contradictions, thinking, she says it doesn't matter, yet every time he speaks, her world narrows. Is it care? Is it habit? Or something more? These reflections allow the audience to enter his mind and feel the tension he experiences, a tension that blends curiosity, admiration, and a hint of unacknowledged attraction. By the end of this keynote, the audience should feel a heightened sense of emotional tension. They are fully aware of the subtle contradictions, the small but meaningful gestures, and the narrator's growing internal conflict. The stage is set for Part 4, where vulnerability begins to surface and the emotional stakes deepen. The slow-burn romance now has a foundation of curiosity, hesitation, and unspoken desire that keeps viewers invested. After the tension and contradictions of the previous chapters, Part 4 slows the pace to focus on emotional intimacy. The male narrator begins to see glimpses of the woman's vulnerability, glimpses that contrast with her composed, confident exterior. These moments are small but potent, revealing depth beneath her grace and subtly bridging the emotional gap between them. The narrator notices her in a quiet moment, perhaps during a shared break, a pause in conversation, or a calm evening where the chaos of the world seems distant. She doesn't speak first, her silence carries weight. Then, almost hesitantly, she allows herself to reveal something personal, a fear, a regret, or a memory that shows her human side. It's not dramatic or oversharing, it's understated, authentic, and entirely relatable. The emotional goal here is to deepen intimacy. The audience should feel the narrator's awareness of her fragility, his protective instinct stirring, and the subtle attraction that grows from shared humanity rather than overt romance. For example, she might speak softly about a mistake she once made, her voice catching just slightly, eyes fixed somewhere distant as though hoping her words will vanish into the quiet. Physical and sensory details reinforce the intimacy. Perhaps she leans slightly toward him while explaining, her hand brushing against his as she gestures unconsciously, or her shoulders shift closer, minimizing the space between them. The narrator notices these details, the warmth radiating from her hand, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the ambient sounds of the room, the rhythmic cadence of her breath when she pauses. These small, sensory-rich cues create a feeling of closeness that words alone cannot convey. Her vulnerability also subtly shifts the dynamic between them. The narrator senses her trust, her willingness to let him see a side of her that is usually guarded. His reactions are quiet but deeply felt, a softening of expression, a tilt of his head in empathy, or a gentle, reassuring presence that allows her to feel safe. These moments are not overtly romantic yet carry the weight of emotional connection, demonstrating that intimacy begins with honesty and understanding. Internal reflection continues to drive the narrative. The narrator realizes how her subtle contradictions, the warmth she shows despite her words, now make sense. He sees her as more than the composed, distant figure he first noticed. She is multi-layered, human, and quietly compelling. Her care and attention, previously enigmatic, now appear as extensions of her vulnerability and her complex emotional world. By the end of this keynote, the audience should feel a deepening emotional connection between the characters. The tension is no longer only curiosity, it is rooted in empathy, understanding, and the slow recognition of mutual care. This moment lays the groundwork for the next stage, the narrator confronting the contradictions and acknowledging the stirrings of his own feelings, setting up a gradual emotional climax in the story's later parts. By this stage, the slow-burn romance has deepened. The male narrator has spent enough time observing her to recognize patterns, contradictions, and moments of vulnerability. Part 5 focuses on his quiet realizations, the acknowledgement of his growing feelings, and his awareness of her conflicted behavior, which adds subtle tension to the narrative. The narrator begins to notice how often her actions contradict her words. She claims someone is not important, yet the care she shows, even in seemingly trivial gestures, cannot be ignored. Perhaps she remembers small details about that person, gently adjusts something for them without announcement, or unconsciously leans in when they speak. These observations are not lost on him. He sees it all, and it sparks a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and an emotional stir he hasn't yet fully named. Emotional tension comes from his internal conflict. He recognizes his attraction growing, though not in a superficial sense, but a deepening emotional awareness. He feels drawn to her warmth, her layered personality, and her quiet gestures of care. Yet he hesitates, mindful of boundaries, the age difference, and the social decorum that dictates restraint. This hesitation makes the narrative relatable. Viewers understand his longing, but also the respect and caution that define his perspective. Sensory and physical details reinforce the intimacy without crossing boundaries. Perhaps she laughs quietly at something he says, her shoulders brushing his in a shared space. Maybe her hand lingers near his on a table, fingers almost touching, or she tilts her head slightly, studying him with an intensity that is equal parts curiosity and vulnerability. These gestures are understated but carry significant emotional weight. The narrator notices how her presence affects him, the subtle warmth, the quiet rhythm of her breathing, the way the light catches her hair as she moves. Internal monologue amplifies the story's emotional depth. He reflects, she says it doesn't matter, yet every gesture says otherwise. And I can't stop noticing. I can't stop feeling drawn to her, even though I know I should. This self-awareness gives the audience insight into the slow-building tension, emotional, not physical, between the two characters. The story emphasizes observation, reflection, and subtle emotional shifts rather than overt action. Part 5 also allows the audience to see her internal conflict indirectly. She may unconsciously mirror his posture, smile softly when he speaks, or pause, as if considering whether her gestures have been too revealing. These contradictions, the careful composure she presents versus the unguarded moments he observes, heighten the slow-burn tension. By the end of this keynote, viewers should feel the narrator's growing awareness of both his own emotions and hers. The tension is quiet but undeniable. He is increasingly drawn to her, yet hesitation and social constraints maintain a delicate boundary. The stage is now perfectly set for Part 6, where emotional confrontation and honesty will heighten the stakes, bringing the story closer to resolution while keeping the audience fully engaged in the evolving dynamic. The story has reached a turning point. The male narrator has spent enough time observing the older woman to understand the contradictions in her words and actions. Part 6 centers on an emotional confrontation, a quiet but intense moment where honesty begins to break through the subtle tension, allowing both characters to acknowledge what they have been feeling. The setting is intimate but natural, perhaps a late evening in a shared workspace, a park bench after dusk, or a quiet corner of a cafe. The atmosphere itself mirrors the emotional weight, soft lighting, gentle ambient sounds, and a sense of privacy that encourages vulnerability. The narrator, careful and observant, finally gathers the courage to voice the question that has been lingering in his mind, why she treats someone she claims isn't important with such attention and care. The older woman hesitates at first. Her composure, usually so deliberate and confident, falters in subtle ways. She may fidget with a ring, clasp her hands, or avoid eye contact for a moment, her chest rising and falling in quiet tension. These small gestures communicate vulnerability more effectively than words could. The narrator notices everything, the way her fingers twist nervously, the faint catch in her voice, the way she tilts her head slightly, as if measuring how much to reveal. When she finally speaks, the words are soft and unguarded. She admits the truth, not in a dramatic confession, but a quiet acknowledgement of care and attention she hasn't been able to fully articulate before. Perhaps she explains that her concern is genuine, that she is drawn to sincerity and presence, or that her emotions are more complicated than she expected. The tension is no longer ambiguous. The audience sees her vulnerability, her honesty, and the emotional risk she is taking. Physical closeness underscores the intimacy of the moment. She might unconsciously lean a little closer, shoulders brushing, or her hand may rest near his on a table. The narrator senses warmth radiating from her, notices the faint scent she carries, the soft rhythm of her breath, the subtle tremor in her hands as she speaks. These sensory details reinforce the emotional intimacy while keeping the interaction safe and YouTube appropriate. For the narrator, the confrontation is transformative. His initial curiosity and quiet admiration evolve into a deeper empathy and recognition of mutual emotional connection. Internal reflection allows the audience to experience his processing. I see her now, not just the composure, but the care she can't hide. I feel her honesty in the way she leans closer, in the quiet weight of her gaze. And I don't want to look away. By the end of this keynote, the audience should feel the emotional tension at its peak. There is honesty, vulnerability, and the unspoken acknowledgement of desire and care between the two characters. This moment sets up the resolution in Part 7, the careful, tender development of mutual affection, emotional connection, and subtle romantic closure. The confrontation is not dramatic. It is human, heartfelt, and deeply moving, a key moment in a slow-burn romance that makes the story emotionally resonant and satisfying for viewers. After the emotional confrontation, the story moves into a space of calm and understanding, a gentle denouement where both characters process their feelings and allow themselves to exist in mutual care. Part 7 emphasizes emotional resolution, the kind of tender intimacy that feels real, safe, and deeply satisfying to the audience. The setting reflects this emotional warmth. Perhaps they are sitting on a quiet park bench as the sun dips low, a soft breeze carrying the scent of flowers or earth, or sharing a cozy corner in a cafe, the low hum of conversation surrounding them without intruding. The environment is sensory-rich yet unobtrusive, allowing the audience to focus entirely on the nuances of their connection. The older woman and the narrator move with quiet awareness of each other. There is no rush, no forced gestures, just subtle closeness. Perhaps her hand rests lightly near his, and he notices without overthinking, allowing the warmth to seep into him. A brush of fingers while reaching for a shared object sparks a momentary thrill, the kind that comes from mutual recognition rather than grand gestures. Every glance, smile, and pause is imbued with meaning. The audience can feel the emotional intimacy without needing overt physicality. Internal reflection from the narrator adds depth. He notes the ease in her presence, the way her laughter now feels relaxed and unguarded, and how the moments that once made his chest tighten with anticipation now carry a quiet comfort. He realizes the beauty of this slow-burn connection. It isn't about claiming her or being claimed. It's about the shared space, the honesty, the trust, and the little moments that mean everything. The older woman also shows subtle changes. Her gestures are calmer, less hesitant. Perhaps she leans slightly closer while speaking, her shoulders aligning with his in an unspoken sense of companionship. Her eyes linger, not out of uncertainty, but with quiet appreciation and care. The contradictions that once caused tension have melted into understanding. Her attentions are now openly gentle and warm, and he can acknowledge them without fear or doubt. Emotionally, the story achieves resolution by emphasizing mutual respect and quiet affection. There are moments of lingering glances, soft smiles, and gentle touches, a hand resting lightly on his arm or a shoulder brushing his. These are not overtly romantic in a physical sense, but carry the weight of emotional intimacy, creating a deeply satisfying slow-burn conclusion. The audience feels the love, connection, and warmth, knowing the relationship has evolved naturally from curiosity and tension to mutual understanding and care. The ending also highlights reflection and emotional growth. Both characters have navigated hesitation, internal conflict, and vulnerability to arrive at this tender equilibrium. The narrator appreciates the depth of her character, the complexity of emotions, and the beauty in small gestures that speak louder than words. She, in turn, seems at ease, comfortable sharing her space and emotional presence without pretense. By the conclusion, viewers are left with a sense of warm closure and heartfelt satisfaction. The story has moved from curiosity to vulnerability, from tension to honesty, and finally to a quiet, meaningful intimacy. It embodies a realistic, YouTube-safe slow-burn romance, leaving the audience emotionally fulfilled while appreciating the nuances of a subtle, age-gap connection that grows naturally, deeply, and tenderly over time.